Welcome to episode 20 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. In our last episode, we discussed why your perfect hreflang may not be working. There was a lot of good, valuable nuggets in there, interesting conversations, and I learned a couple things myself. In this episode, we're going to dig into Google's recent Search Off the Record podcast on handling duplicates, which I found really interesting. Some of the things that I found was how Google has a real challenge with localization and near duplicates. They have this idea of black holes and error pages. That's a phenomenon that they deal with and can wreak havoc with your site. But Bill, you had a chance to watch this also. Actually, you saw it before me. What are some of your thoughts on this?
I thought it was interesting. I think I really like these when they're bringing in specialists from different areas because they all bring additional information that, some people may know, but I think it really started to tie things together. The first 4 minutes were really trying to explain the process that, basically John Mueller said. He gave a quick definition and said, look, think of it like this. We use clusters, which are groups of pages that the system believes are the same or similar. And then that bucket or that group or box or however you want to think about that cluster is handed off to a canonicalization process or what's called the dupes team. And so the person who joined them was Alan Scott, and he's from literally called the dupes team. And their job is to sort out the dupes. And so he went through this process that the cluster is formed. So during crawl, they detect pages that are the same or near identical and put them in a cluster, in a group. And then that it's handed off to the next step, the dupes team, that applies trying to figure out which page is the best of everything in here. And so think about it. If you had a shelf with a bunch of books, the exact same book, it can't be the exact same book, but you had different editions, like a college textbook, there's 15 editions and maybe different covers and all that. And they said, which one of these would we pull off the shelf to give to somebody as the best version? And then Alan said that they use something like 40 variables. And what was interesting, John joked that I can just see all the SEOs out there opening up a spreadsheet, trying to capture a list of 40 variables because we put a number to something. And what he said is that all of these variables, and he didn't spout them all off, but Search Engine Land did a good job of breaking down ones that have been said and other people have written about. But he talks about things like, rel canonical, redirects, sitemaps, how many links to it, the authority, a variety of things like that. And then his team, the dupes team, uses these, applies these weightings to the cluster to do it. Now, this is exactly what we know happens with international. As you said in your intro, Google comes across 25 English language pages that are nearly identical. Maybe there's a currency difference. Maybe they have a country name and a title tag, but like many e-commerce pages, they're exactly the same. Which one of these, is the best? And this is where, again, where did they get the signal from? And I've been wanting to write this article and create this matrix for a couple weeks now with, this weighting logic. But that's what it is, right? And this is all a system, and it's a system that happens after another system runs. And then he did make sort of jump ahead. Alan did say that hreflang is a system. And that system is on top of canonicalization or deduping. So once they've applied weighting signals, then they can apply hreflang to it. And he introduced yet another team called serving. And hreflang seems to sit somewhere between the duplicate team and the serving team, because then this, the alternate page or the hreflang signal is applied, and that's then presented during the serving layer. So that's pretty interesting. And Alan did mention that they should try to get the serving team to come in and talk about what they do and how they take things basically from the bowels of the database and present it on the interface. So to me, that was very interesting. We're going to talk about some other international things in a moment.
And to make it more complicated, during the discussions, they also brought up the rendering team having to deal with issues related to JavaScript and edge
Exactly.
cases, and
Right.
like a Duke team, crawl team, serving team, rendering team.
Right.
Getting search right is not easy.
And they went into that a little bit and they referenced back a previous episode where they had folks from the rendering team, where exactly that they were, if they can't get the signals and they got to wait for rendering, then that page is going to sit in the cluster until it
Yeah.
can be moved out. Right. So that's exactly right. There's rendering. And if you think about all of these chains need to work. And as and in the article, I said, my God, man, Google's got to be just as screwed up as everybody else on trying to get things. Because there are a couple of things that came across to me as a listener who tries to dissect and understand why people are saying things that, where Alan, and we'll talk about this in a moment, where Alan said he's trying to get the crawl team to bring the canonical tag into their side of the equation. And it's really interesting that that they will queue the destination. So let's say, like the example he gave, one of the biggest challenges, or a significant challenge to use his words, that the dupes team has is applying weighting logic when they get conflicting signals. And the one he said, the two most common are when they're giving, so for a page, that page then has a 301 redirect to a new page, and that new page has a canonical either to a yet another page, so bringing a third page into the equation, or sending it back to the original page. So it says because of that, they ignore both of those signals. Those are strong signals, his words. And they have to then fall back to one of the other 38 signals or 40-ish signals that's in the equation, which tend to be, in his words, lesser signals like sitemaps or PageRank. And so
Yeah.
if
I think you
two
said
really
weaker.
critical,
Yeah, I think you said weaker signals, and he also went into like things like HTTP versus HTTPS,
exactly,
at sitemaps being wrong.
or it not being in a sitemap or is in a sitemap or
Yeah, right.
incorrect URLs in a sitemap. And that leads me to the other thing that I put actually as the second point was ensure that every signal points in the right direction, right? And so,
Right.
he said it's explicitly the webmaster's job to make sure that all these signals point in the right direction, that you don't have these errors. And I thought that was great because we've been telling people, this is now the 20th episode. I think every episode we've had one reference to another about, keeping your house clean and fixing these errors because they have implications when you don't. So that was another one saying, look, it's on you to make sure all the signals point in the right direction. Another topic that they mentioned was this thing called the localization iceberg. Actually, let me go back. The topic that they said the most, because again, I'm using my abbreviated notes. I think they said it was 9 times. They referenced the black hole, or more specifically, the marauding black hole. And about a third of the way through it, he started talking about this various error scenarios. And even an even bigger problem is when errored page, like your 404 page, because somebody made a custom 404, but that custom 404, while it says 404 in the headline and hey, this page not found, maybe a search box, serves a 200. So if you get 1,000 pages serving a 200 status 404 stated error page, they all get bundled as one cluster. And then they talked about a couple of these in this, if basically the takeaway is if your pages end up in one of these black holes, it's unlikely that they're going to come out. So he said this: we will put these pages into a black hole and never coming back out due to crawl like other potential duplicates may. So, you're not helping yourself by having all of these negative signals. And again, 9 times he referred to these black holes and specifically around error pages. A very interesting one he gave was between him and Martin talking about e-commerce sites. So a lot of e-commerce sites do a couple things. Number one, they will 302 or 301 an out of stock page product, either up in a hierarchy to a category page or to an alternative product. Or the other one they will do is they will redirect you to a page that says this page is temporary out of stock. Give us your email and we'll notify you when it's back. Because that has a 200 and it's exactly the same thing, and they specifically use the concept of checksum, which is simply a numeric score for that page. And you end up with, let's say there's 400 pages that are out of stock, and they're all sent to this temporary out of stock mechanism. And that temporary out of stock mechanism has the same checksum. For discussion purposes, it's 100. So now we've got 100 pages that all have the same checksum that are being sent to the same location. Google's going to keep these as duplicates, and you're not going to break out of that. And so this was one where when you try to get that page reindexed, because you redirected it, it picked up that destination checksum, it's going to be considered a duplicate variation, and that's in like a perpetual black hole. So you got to think about that and read the article, listen to the podcast, because I want to make sure that I captured it correctly. So get it from their words. And I think we want to drill deeper into this because that was like a grenade they lobbed out there and didn't go that deep into it. I didn't see anybody else cover that, which was interesting. So it is, to me, a really big problem for e-commerce sites. Anything you want to add to that? Because I think it is a very nuanced error that we come across quite a bit.
Yeah, it was pretty scary when he started talking about that black hole phenomenon, and especially with pages that have the same checksum, like a out of stock page. And those pages could basically disappear from search and be very hard to bring back. He also talked about issues like maybe JavaScript's not working and you have the same situation where all of the pages look the same on a first crawl and JavaScript not working when they try to render it, and they all get clustered the same way as a bunch of pages that look the same, and kind of scared the pants off me there.
Yeah. And there was somebody else this week I saw. I just looked at passing, talking about they detected another type of problem with rendering, and we're pushing for people, to serve the full page and deal with rendering for like secondary functionality. It wasn't tied to this, but it was another similar type problem that Google was getting, I dare use the word the unrendered page that was nothing but a placeholder until they could render it. So it's just another one of these things that you need to make sure Google can render the page and not have complex JavaScript driving some of this, especially if you're e-commerce.
Yeah. And it was especially from our standpoint, it was really interesting when, the word localization came up, and like, it was like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's a problem. And yeah, you can see everybody just basically giving into that. That's really difficult. What keeps us in business.
Well, that was the silver medal of mentions. That was number 2. It was 7 references to the localization iceberg. And it was very interesting what he was saying is that the piece above the surface, that most people focus on, is nothing compared to what's underneath. And then he says the complexity of the localization iceberg involves multiple teams across the entire stack with indexing, clustering, deduping, and serving. And I thought that was really interesting. One point that Martin made, so if you if you listen to episode 19, we talked about this idea of aspirational hreflang, where your system, because maybe pages haven't been localized yet, flag it as being localized. So you're saying these pages are in Greek, but they're actually in English. Alan actually said that his team, they don't think that is an apparent duplicate signal. He was going to go back and really look at that. And so it's interesting because these pages are getting tripped up by the duplicate. And I think what's probably happening is some system, maybe it's the hreflang system. Again, my next point was he explicitly said that it's a separate system. And it's like, thank you, because I've been trying to tell people this forever. And it's the number one reason why you have to have things correct, why you have to have the full cluster, why it has to be right. Because if it's processed by a separate system and that system is a little more precise than the sort of whatever, that maybe is part of a pre-system, or because it's a sub-process of a system, it's got to be right. But this is what he was saying, is that, again, my ears perked up when he said, this is his words. What was interesting is that should be an apparent duplicate signal that the dupe teams may have not have noticed. And then he said this is actually a better question for the serving team. Remember, the chain of events was pages get clustered as being similar or duplicates. His team has to break the needle in the haystack in the cluster. And then, the rendering engine does its thing. hreflang is applied at this point, and then that's done by the serving team. So this starts to tie the pieces together. If you think about our previous episode, we were talking about these chains. And so if the other signals have been applied to a page, let's say all 40 elements were considered, and you have these duplicate language, especially same language pages still stuck in the cluster, it's going to take the hreflang processing to potentially pull them out. And again, this gets back to what Martin was saying a couple times, is this is why the canonical version still shows in Search Console, right? It may not be showing all these others. It may be still in the duplicate canonical problem until the hreflang is fully processed, in effect, taking out of duplicate status. So that may clarify that whole point of people asking, why is this flagged as a duplicate when I'm using hreflang? And that's because it's not been processed. But I thought it was interesting that they were talking about that, and he specifically states that sitting on top of clustering in the dupe system is the hreflang system. So it's step 3 in that processing. And then he said what they do is, if they do understand the annotations, they will substitute them during the serving process. And that led to
I've seen where a page has been marked a duplicate, yet it's still being served.
And that's that hreflang has probably been applied to it, and it's not, that system has not been reintegrated into Search Console. Because again, in the why your perfect hreflang is not working, we talked about this, where pages hadn't been indexed yet. Pages were still considered duplicates, and we're seeing, because the hreflang was introduced so late, or because of a variety of errors with it being processed, it was taking more time. So one of the sites that was in that 12 that I looked at, we're just now starting to see 49 days after deploying their hreflang correctly, they're starting to see pages make it into the index. And we're running that test. Are they showing, and are they ranking, and are they delivering traffic, but yet Google's still tagging them as duplicate canonical because the system hasn't been updated? And so we're seeing that there's a lag in hreflang processing, yet again, why you need to have hreflang correct during a migration or a new market launch. And again, that's the point we make. Now, an even more important reason why you need to get your hreflang act together is one of these references to the iceberg is Alan mentioned that there is a project. He didn't give the code name, or he was hoping it would be out by the end of the year, but maybe not. We don't know the code name. We don't know what it does. So he cryptically said, we want to serve more hreflang variants. And I know that Gary has been working because he asked everybody to give him ideas. In the show notes, we'll link to the idea. In the article, I linked to the ideas that we had. We gave, I think, what do we give, Bill? 20 odd variation alternatives to hreflang that could potentially be used, all equally as or more complicated. But what he said is we want to utilize them more, but we need, and here's his words, but we need to put in place mechanisms that will determine basically how much we can trust it on a given site. So we're doing some crawl and verification, basically determine, is the site serving its hreflang mapping correctly? If so, then they're going to try to apply that more without having to re-verify every time. So if you have the trust, and what I took away from that is you've got to have it correct and you've got to be trusted to be doing it right so that you're not bait and switching, because we've seen where people have won prizes, bug prizes as well as SEO Oktoberfest, sort of contests because they figured out hreflang bugs that have been exploited. And so, like most things with Google, the more they can trust your site, your implementation, the more likely they're going to take it.
I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You can also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group.
So get your hreflang right. Talk to us. We can help you. We can do an audit. We can be a neutral third party to tell you if it's right and then point you in the right direction with your internal teams or your agency teams, to make sure it's dialed in. And then once we know what this new feature function set is, we'll definitely tell you about it. I just had two other things real quick. One, there was a discussion about XDefault. His explanation, I think, can be potentially confusing. He tried equating it to rel canonical, which it can be, but the problem is not everybody uses it on every page. And it does, the misleading part is like, it may not be, he said it should be in the same cluster without a specific location preference. That's not necessarily a true statement. And I think he was probably talking about a nuance and a context that I've actually asked them if they can clarify that. But I showed that, he did say, which again is not a true statement, he felt most sites get XDefault correct. I actually find that this is a top 5 mistake people make. I can pretty much guarantee if somebody tells me they're a decentralized multinational organization where each market or each region controls, or if they have multiple agencies, to me, there's a 99% probability that their XDefault will be deployed incorrectly. That each region or each market will set their market as the XDefault. You can virtually guarantee this if they're on separate CMSs, because the two CMSs don't talk, and they will want an XDefault because all the testing tools look for an XDefault. The problem is these tools don't look across CMS builds, because if they're testing an hreflang in tags or XML sitemap that aren't built by a neutral tool, if it's been built by the CMS or something where this region is built because the agency only has a remit for 8 markets, which is like insane. They only care about their 8 markets, so they make sure hreflang is dialed in for these 8 markets. That XDefault will be incorrect. So check your XDefault across markets and regions to make sure it's the same XDefault, because it is the fallover if you don't have a version. You can't pick and choose. And I wish Google would say this. You can't pick and choose. They do, but we need to be spoon-fed errors. Because again, like we started at the beginning of this podcast, Google expects your stuff to be correct.
Yeah, he said it indicates as a signal to serve when there's no clear match for a user's locale or language preference. And then he said something like, it's a very valuable tool, but it isn't widely used or used properly. The people that use it know how to use it typically, but like in your experience, people aren't using it properly. But Yeah, I've seen a lot of the forums people talking about X default there. It's not clear to people how it's supposed to be used.
Right. Yeah, I sent them what I thought was a clear, and then we have articles in that try to clarify it. The last 2 points. One, I love how Alan, in giving an example, was having a conversation with Google. We do this all the time. We tell people, and you and I were talking about a case I had recently where their celebrity SEO had told them to. I'm not even going to say it because somebody's going to misconstrue this, but basically in the article I give a version of this conversation where it says, hey Google, I'm glad you found my UK page because I have it listed in my hreflang entry, my XML sitemap, and linked to it from many other UK pages. While I wanted index to bring me significant SEO traffic, please respect my rel canonical tag that says don't index it and use my US page in lieu of the US UK page. Thank you. And so Alan had a couple of these conversations like that. Basically, pretend you're talking to Google and explain what you see. And if you have that conversation out loud, you will quickly see the error in the recommendation. Because as I did, I told Google we've got all these other signals that he just told us were valuable signals that are saying do this. And then we introduce this signal that says no, don't do them. And so that's just how they break those signals. And I'm just going to leave you with related but separate, where Google here, plus what Gary said in the internationalization hreflang session, is that these are all separate systems and that don't necessarily use the logic or that. And I'm going to specifically point to the canonical, because Alan was saying he's been trying to get the crawling team to integrate the canonical handling into the crawl. I thought that was fascinating that that's not part of a crawl access. Gary said during the internationalization one that hreflang during crawling explicitly creates a crawl dependency. It triggers
Yeah.
a crawl dependency, meaning that Google is now it's telling it explicit, go crawl these pages, essentially to verify the reciprocation of them being alternate. So it was just
Let me
interesting again. Go ahead.
let me ask a question. So, how could they possibly, thinking like a search engine, how could they possibly do that if they're doing it with tags?
Doing what? Oh, during
Using
crawl, right? So
Yeah, but
so
they
when
would
they
have to crawl
crawl,
everything
they're in
before they saw the tags. I mean,
right.
it makes such a good case for hreflang sitemap.
Exactly. And then you get so they're, as they're crawling, they're finding these URLs. And if they find it within a hreflang tag as opposed to a regular tag, they should trigger that differently than if it wasn't. And what I thought was interesting is there is no implicit directive to crawl the canonical destination. And he specifically said if it's not been
Right.
crawled before. So this is perfect. Again, back to our point on new migrations. But again, at the end of the day, it's just saying these are separate systems that may not be completely interconnected in a perfect scenario. And so the more we can ensure that we're binding to what is the optimal standards for each of these systems and phases, the more likely that things are going to work as expected. And I thought that was a really interesting takeaway from this.
Yeah, that great conversation. The podcast was really interesting. The concept of clusters of pages, and I guess they could be, even on any domain, not just a com. I can't imagine the scale that Google is doing this at. Like, think of all the articles that are published on other websites. They used to have back in the day. You could pay and get onto 60 different websites. An article that you wrote, all the same exact article. Um,
And they negated
it,
that. So it sounds like they cluster them, they find them,
yeah,
because
right,
we've
right,
worked with people over the years. Like I remember one was a site that was writing these brilliant articles, and then they had a clunky internal workflow. But they were also being licensed by, I think it was Yahoo, right? So Yahoo would get the feed. So they'd publish all these articles to go live. and then Yahoo would post them instantly.
Yeah.
Right? They'd immediately come, they'd be triggered instantly. And these guys, I think it was like a 4-day lag. And so Yahoo was getting the first mover advantage. And so they were the ones ranking for the article concepts as opposed to the people who wrote it. And then when they were
Which
trying to
just
get
goes,
theirs in,
yeah,
go
yeah,
ahead.
which goes to show you that, maybe indexation time is one of the 40 that they're using for determining which page to show.
And if you go back to one of their podcasts, we got to find it. See, you always do this to me. You make me remember some nugget that we got to extrapolate on. So why does Google, the only reason Google says you should use a date in your sitemap is that reason. It helps them understand who had it first. So they like that date when you say it was produced. They can get it from the server, but this date, that John Mueller and I think somebody else at Google said it. I got to find the reference now. I know I wrote about it.
I don't
I know
remember
we have
that.
it in the. They were saying that because the what is that stupid weighting score relevancy?
Yeah, I thought I
Don't
didn't
even
even think
waste time putting
they,
that.
I didn't even think they
But the
looked at the
date,
date.
John said they can potentially use that date as a tiebreaker.
Okay. So,
And so that was his
not
only
to,
rationale for using the date.
not to put a black hat on, but could you force an earlier date on your sitemap?
Absolutely, but it's going to still bind to the date that they found it. You can say you wrote it
Oh,
9
that's
years
true. They
ago.
probably
Still doesn't
locked
matter
that in.
what day did they
Yeah,
fetch it. When did they
they,
first see it?
I'm sure they
And
thought of
especially
this.
when you get the crawl hints now from from Cloudflare and people like that,
Yeah,
they're all tagging, they know who had it first. But that's the thing. I just wanted to point that out because how many people are now going to go game their date to backdate? It's the same knuckleheads that will go in and write a script to change the
change
date
the
on
date
all
every
their
day,
articles to the current month.
so it's
Um,
fresh.
so it's fresh. No, they know that shit because they can again check some. This is why, we used to game XML sitemaps by simply rewriting them, adding or taking out a URL to change the checksum to know something had been changed. But anyways, I think this was good. This is why I like listening to these because I always pick out 8 or 9 sound bites that you can start piecing together to understand the pieces of the puzzle. Nothing materially going to change your business other than, make sure that you're fixing your errors and making sure that your signals are straight. And again, many reasons for doing that. And I'm looking forward to what they come out with improvements, enhancements to hreflang.
Yeah, cool. Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Alan Scott from the Duplicate team. I think this is a good conversation, and probably a good place to break. What do you think?
Sounds good.
All right. Any other final thoughts?
Nope. Just check out the articles connected and please ask us questions. Again, we've had a couple of these now where we're prompted by people posting something in Facebook or sending us a note or a comment. So please do that and check out some of our courses and let us know, like it if you like what we're talking about and by all means send us ideas, things you want us to talk about.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we definitely want to hear from you. Your feedback helps motivate us and keeps us making these podcasts. So follow International Web Mastery on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X. And if you find value in our conversations and you're enjoying the show, it really helps get the show in front of other people if you would take a moment to rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. And until next time, take care.
We'll see you.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.